No, we're good, Colette.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. So you can knock your microphone off there for a few minutes and I'll get us rolling, okay? Okay, so good evening, everybody. Hopefully you can all see us. And as you said, we just got this webinar event up and live and launched and what have you. So we should be good to go. I'm going to wait just one more minute, right, to allow a few more people join us, right? Because we have about 750 people registered to attend, and people will be kind of landing in over the course of the first few minutes. So we'll just give them one more minute, and then we're going to jump in. So what we're going to have tonight is short introduction from me. My name is Emmet Major. I work here in Galway, or in the western region, you could say, out west, and I'm responsible for the coordination of a project out here called Planet Youth, which I'm going to tell you a tiny little bit about. That's operating in our patch. It's called Community Health Organisation 2, or Galway Mayo Common, right? And Colette Reynolds is our main speaker. She's the main event, but she's really why you're all here, right? And I'm going to introduce her after my little spiel, right? And we'll get rolling. So the plan is we'll get started imminently. I'll do my introduction about Planet Youth. We'll have Colette. She's going to give a presentation, and what we'll do then is we'll have a Q&A, or questions and answers session at the end. If stuff comes up, right, that she isn't covering that you really want to know about, stick it into the chat function, because the chat function enabled, right? You can type it in that, and what will happen is when we're going, I'll be monitoring the chat as we go, and at the end I'll be putting any questions that are kind of pertinent to Colette at the end, and we'll do our best to get as much of that as we can. And the plan is that we'll absolutely be finishing here bang on time at 8:15. So whatever's happening at 8:15, that will be the end of it. We'll stop at that point. And I'll be hoping that I can get the recording of this event up and put online in a few days, possibly early next week, in which case anybody who's registered will get a link to the recording as well. So that's it. I think we've given enough time. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just do a quick, hang on, let me just change this over here. I'm going to do a quick sharing of my screen. I'm just going to turn this on. Where are we? Over here, this one, and this one. Okay, so let me go back here. This and this and this. Click, click, click. And we should all be good to go. All right, so what you're looking at here is a short, well, not that short, but a very rapid, I'll give you a very rapid PowerPoint presentation. And it'll explain the background to why we're all here a little bit. So as I said, I look after this project that's operating in the west of Ireland called Planet Youth. I work here for the Education Training Board and was an agency called the Western Region Drug and Alcohol Task Force as well, which is responsible for various different aspects of the national drug strategy and its implementation regionally here in the West, right? So it's a big interagency undertaking, really, this project that we've been working on here for a few years now. Let me just go back over here, and this will give you an idea. So see, these will be some of the agencies in the region, our county councils, our ETB, TUSLA, the HSE, and so on, will be kind of interagency partners and funders of this program, right? And what is it, right? So it's a public health program, and it's designed to improve what would be considered long-term health outcomes and actually long-term life outcomes for our school-going population. So for the children in our secondary schools at the moment, but also the children in our national schools and even the ones that are coming up through our preschool, right? It's based on what's called the Icelandic Primary Prevention Model. So we brought this here from Iceland, from Reykjavik in 2018, and this is why there was so much interest in what they've been doing. They managed to go from having the highest substance use rates in the developed world 25 years ago now. Over the course of about 15 years, they managed to get themselves to having the lowest underage substance use rates in the world. So that's smoking, cannabis, alcohol use, drunkenness. It was a big political problem, and they addressed it by developing this approach called primary prevention. So as opposed to trying to fix the problem that had happened, to prevent the problem arising for the next generation of young people. Very, very effective program. Loads and loads of other improvements came along the way that they don't talk about as much, but there was loads of other significant life outcomes and health outcomes for the young population. Really fantastic way of working that we're trying to develop and emulate and work on here, implementing in the west of Ireland. Okay, so one of the things that we'll be doing with Planet Youth is trying to address other, not just the substance use stuff, but other things like you can see here: screen use, physical activity, mental health, sleep, and so on. Right, so there's loads of different ways you can work this kind of approach. And every 2 years, what we do is we survey all of the teenagers in all of our schools in Galway, Mayo, Roscommon. So there's 91 post-primary schools and centres. They all participate. It's a big undertaking. About 5,500 young people participate each time. First one was in 2018, the second in 2020. We've just finished the most recent survey in 2022. The first two were paper-based, and that's a pallet of paper going to Reykjavik there to be scanned. There in the bottom middle picture, you can see it there. It says Irish Survey 2018. It's about a ton of paper. It takes ages. It takes weeks and weeks to scan it all. So the new version has been done online. COVID actually has made that possible, believe it or not. It makes life a little bit easier. It's still a lot of work to get the survey done, but you can see here, very extensive document. It's a 24-page document. It takes them nearly an hour to fill it in. It's longer than the Irish census. And what basically it's asking about is the lives of our young people at 15 and 16. So it's the teenagers post-junior cert on their return to school. In all our schools and centres, they're 15 or 16 and they're in TY, or some of them skip TY and go into fifth. But wherever they've gone, if they've sat the junior cert, they sit down and do this in our schools in Galway, Mayo, Roscommon. It asks them all about their lives, their life at home, their life online, their life in school, their peers, their friendships, their sports and hobbies, substance use, sexual health, mental health, and on it goes, right? So a really exhaustive examination of their lives, and very accurate and thorough because there's so many involved in doing it. We have a really, really good picture of what's going on. And what we're trying to find out is where can we develop changes, or what are called interventions or improvements in these domains, right? And that's their parents and family, you can see here. Their leisure time is hugely important. What are they doing in their spare time? Their school experience is quite important as they're growing up. And then the peer group they're in will define a lot of what they do. And of course, it's all encompassed by the community at large, right? So that's what the purpose of the survey is. It's to give us the information to make improvements. So we take the voice of the teenagers at this age, right? And so they're telling us what's going on at 15 and 16 every 2 years. And what we're trying to do is make improvements for the children that are coming behind. So the children currently coming into first year of secondary school. So when they're 12 and 13, they'll go into first year in our secondary schools in the region. We're trying to make improvements and changes for them, but also increasingly, really what we'd be looking at is how can we begin to really change the landscape that the children are growing up from a much younger age. So children, as they're starting international school, and there's some talk about, trying to develop stuff more at the preschool level as well. So a lot of information on the website. The county reports are up there. The most recent ones are the 2020 ones. There'll be new ones up there in about a month from the 2022 figures. One of the very first things that we did with the data was actually give, quite good quality, simple information out to parents of incoming first year. So in 2019, with the first round of data, we developed a little booklet and the fridge magnet as well, which is bedtimes and screen time stuff. Talks about alcohol and substances and vaping and different things that's 3 years ahead. So when the kids are doing this, they're 15, 16, your child's 12, 13, you can make some simple changes at home to prevent the same issues arising, right? So that's what we're trying to do. How do we get ahead of the problem? So that's been done. Around 6,500 of those go out through all the, the post-primary schools, the secondary schools through first-year parents. They go home in school bags, or they get distributed at first-year parent information nights. And that's roughly what we have. And every year in our schools, in Galway, Mayo, Roscommon, we're around 6,500 kids in each school year, somewhere between 6,500 and 7. Now, the new piece there's a whole kind of project called Parent Power at the moment, which is a national school program. And this is a little booklet that gets distributed out to all the junior infant parents incoming in our region now every year. It's about 450 national schools. It's a big job to get all this information out there, right? But all of our national schools get this information to go home to parents, junior infant parents, in October, November every year, or sometimes before the summer, right? So it talks a tiny bit about the survey, what the teens are saying, talks about the importance of family time, good routines at home. You sit down, you can fill it in with your child, what are we doing well, what we'd like to do better. And really this is it. It's about this idea of if you get good routines in early, you get so far ahead of the game. Talks about sleep and bedtimes. Nobody really knows. You kind of tend to do your best with this, but just pretty good guidance around what they should be. Talks about screen time here, and it talks about sports and hobbies. One of the big things they did in Iceland was a huge development of the extracurricular space. How do we get kids access to much higher and a broader range of hobbies and sports? So that's something that we're working on here as part of this overall model. Making changes at home, that's talked about if people want to bring in changes if they feel they've made, they need to do a few things differently. And this is a big piece of what we're trying to do as well, is this idea of parents working together, parent power, right? So if as a classroom of parents or a class group or most of the classroom, not everybody would always get involved, right? But if broadly speaking, everybody agreed at the outset of school, national school, that say the 5-year birthday party is going to be the max, right? Or nobody is going to get a phone till secondary school. The more, the more parents that are on board are on a similar kind of page about stuff, the easier it is for everyone. So that's a big part of what we're trying to develop in the parenting space over here is just can we get people to work together a bit more, right? So it's all up on the Parent Power website, the information about that, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of why we're here tonight. So we're going to be talking to Colette now in a minute, right? But the background to this a little bit is that one of the things we were doing in the last couple of years, every November, right, is we put on a similar workshop around sleep for secondary schools and for national schools, right? And it's called The Importance of Sleep for Our National School Children, The Importance of Sleep for Our Teenagers. And Lucy Wolfe, she's an author, she talks, she does various things in this space, a lot to do with toddlers, she's teenagers herself. And these were hugely well attended, a lot of interest in the topic, how can we improve sleep for our kids? And the reason we did this, right, is in the survey, in the 2020 survey, it was really apparent that we have a problem here. We actually have a bit of an issue around sleep in our teens, right? Actually, only 10% of them are sleeping the right amount. About 41% are doing okay. And 59% of our teens aren't sleeping enough or anything like enough for that matter. And it's really, really interesting when you look into the data set and you cross-tabulate sleep for things like mental health. This is what you see, right? So 10% of our kids that are sleeping properly, 67% of those kids say they have good mental health. And you can see the dramatic change that begins to happen for the kids that aren't sleeping. So the 59% there on the right, their mental health is completely different to the kids who are sleeping properly, right? The same could be said about school engagement, and school engagement has very little to do with schoolwork. It's more to do with enjoying school and being there for what school has to offer, and so on, right? And when we ran these last November, actually Colette attended one of these out of interest for her own kids, right? And she got in touch to say, you know what, I think it'd be really interesting to do something around the topic of healthy eating and getting good habits established early there. And I said, you know what, you're dead right. So that's kind of why we're all here tonight and why we put this on this February. Okay, so just moving on from that, right? One of the things that we do have the opportunity to do with the Planet Youth survey, and we have, because we're on the third iteration most recently, is modify it, right? So we use the international questionnaire the first time. We adapted it further for use in Ireland in 2020, and we've also adapted it further again and improved it further again for our use here most recently, right? And we added in some information because we were curious to know a little bit more about sleep. So instead of just asking how much sleep the kids are getting, we ask what time they're going to bed, what time they're getting to sleep, what time they get up in the morning. Do they feel tired during the day? Do they fall asleep during the day? Do they have a phone in the room at night? This would interest you, right? So this is a big part of the problem that we have with sleep in our teens. You can see here about 84% of them have a phone in their bedroom at night. So it's a very preventable problem, right? But it's tricky. It's very hard to get a teenager to not, hand you their phone. So, well, but if we can get ahead of it, so when the kids are getting their phones, or in first year maybe, that the phone is always handed up to be charged, and so on and so forth. Really, that whole idea of Planet Youth is prevention. How do we get ahead of these problems, right? And that's one way, by parents working together and so on. You can actually affect quite a lot of change. Right, okay, so just moving on from that, this might interest you, and this is purely coincidental, actually, because one of the questions that we had included into the 2022 questionnaire, which was conducted in November, the data set actually only arrived back from Reykjavik last Thursday, so we haven't really had a good chance to do a lot of work on it yet. The county reports and all the school reporting will be done at the back end of March, so it takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get everything prepared and written up and put nice graphical reports and so on. But these questions were included at the back end of the survey, so we were curious to know a little bit more about these topics, so eating breakfast, skipping lunch, and so on. So I just thought I'd share this with you quickly. This is sort of hot off the press, so nobody's really seen this information yet. But this is where we're at for eating breakfast. We're pleasantly surprised. You can see here the blue is the boys, the orange is the girls, right? So 2/3 of the boys are 60, it's exactly 2/3, so 66.6, can't get any closer than that. So 2/3 of the boys have a breakfast every day, and just under half of the girls have breakfast every day. And you can see way over on the left there, 7% of the boys never have a breakfast, and 11.5% of the girls never have a breakfast. So obviously a bit of room for improvement, but not too bad, right? So we have to do a bit more work on this, right? But these are just kind of what we call the frequencies, or the raw frequencies. Who's the amount of who's doing what. There's some data here on about who's skipping lunch. Not terribly interesting to show you there. Do they eat, 5 portions fruit veg a day? Pretty spread out, really. 14-15% never do, but how many adults do it? So it's similar. And then you can say once a month and so on. And every day, not too bad. What's that? 1 in 6 nearly of kids are, eating a lot of fruit and veg every day. So great, right? Probably room for improvement, but nothing as scary as we thought maybe it would be. Okay, and then this one you might find interesting, right? So do you eat a meal with your parents or carers? And this is good as well. So you can see like half of our kids do it every day. It's great. And 3/4 of them, it's every day, or more than half the days in the week. So you could say 3/4 of our kids, more than half of them eat with their parents. More than 3/4 of them eat with their parents more than half days a week. So that's, all that's good. Now life of course will get in the way. Some parents can't get home. It's just impossible. You're eating out of the microwave and things like that. So the shifts and all the rest. I'd say a lot of what we're looking at there is to do with, it just can't be done, right? But if for example we went and cross-tabulated this data, right, which we probably will, but it's a pretty good proxy. There's questions in there about, do you get on with your parents? How's life at home? It's easy to get caring more from your parents and so on. But if you put this in as a proxy, right, so it's a proxy for spending time with your kids. The kids who are eating having a meal with their parents every day, or those ones that are eating, regularly having meals with their parents, are going to be doing better in all sorts of other ways. There will be a very close correlation to all sorts of other stuff based on those 75% compared to the other 25%. I can pretty much guarantee it. Now, this is another one that you could say, you prepare a meal with your parents or carers. And again, 9.5%, 10% or so do so every day, same between boys and girls. And those kids on the right there, the kids on the right hand side, they're going to be doing better because they're spending time with their parents. It's quite an interesting thing to know that the more time kids spend with their parents, the better they do. Tricky when they're teenagers, of course, but that's the case. Okay, so anyway, I've rabbited on a fair bit. I just want to give you a bit of a background about what this is really all about, right? And I expect an awful lot of the parents that are here, right, are going to be hugely interested in the topic of healthy eating because they're struggling at home, right? But what we're always trying to do with the Planet Youth Project is give you some information. If you have kids in the west of Ireland in our schools, and I know there's people here from all over the country, but if you have kids in Galway, Mayo, Roscommon, I'd like to think that the Planet Youth Project will actually improve the landscape for your kids and help improve long-term outcomes for your kids. And you will almost certainly be getting information home by your schools about this project. Either you have it already or you'll be getting it in years to come. And if you're in another part of the country, hopefully Planet Youth will be coming your way at some point, right? It started a recent project in Cavan Monaghan and another one in North Dublin. So there's a lot of interest in the approach and the way of working around the country. And if you want to find out more, or if there's anything you'd like to ask, you can get in touch. That's the email address, the website, planetyouth.ie, or you can get in touch with me directly at info@planetyouth.ie. That's more or less it. I'm going to hand you over now very shortly to Colette, right? And I'm going to stop sharing this. Right, there's enough for me. Let me go back to the thing. Colette. Okay, I can see you, Colette. So, do you need me to tee you up other than to say this is I would describe you as a subject matter expert, right? You're our speaker to talk about healthy eating. This is your field. This is your area of expertise. You're a mum yourself, so you've been there and you have the T-shirt somewhere, I expect. So what I'm going to do, once again, right, Colette's going to be covering a lot of ground in the next 40 minutes or so. And we'll then do a Q&A at the end. If you want to submit a question in chat, do so. I'll be monitoring that. I'm going to turn my screen off. I'll be here, I'll be listening in, and I'll be monitoring the chat, and I'll try and tie everything up there at the end. That's it. Okay. So I'm going to hand over to you, Colette. You've got microphone on, have you?
Yes.
Okay. Fire away. I'll leave you to it. And thanks.
Thanks a million for that, Emmet. Very interesting points there about the data, and also, I suppose, what Planet Youth is trying to achieve. And I suppose, the simple ways we can do this maybe through parent power. So this evening is all about healthy eating habits. So I'm just going to share my screen, first of all, and get started. Okay, so we're going to talk about this evening how we feed our kids rather than focusing really on what we feed our kids. Okay, so just to give you a kind of idea of what's coming up over the next while, very briefly, we're going to talk very simply about what and when should our children eat, some of the effects of poor diets very quickly, why children's diets can get worse over time, problems I see regularly in my practice when parents come to me with their kids, for example, frequent snacking, and some solutions. How do we create more positive meal times? It's a big challenge in many houses. How do we avoid pressure around eating? Again, a lot of kids will feel pressure, and that will negatively affect their eating, even though, you know, we don't mean to apply pressure and we're doing the best, obviously we can, or we're trying to do the best always, and we want to do the best for our kids. Very often, I suppose, the question I get asked is, how do we expand our children's diet if it's quite limited? I talk a little bit about eating with distractions. So like screens, I'll have a very quick focus on breakfast and packed lunches. And I'll also talk about, again, briefly, what a positive relationship with food looks like for our children. What is it that we're looking to achieve? And then it might be easier to know how to, you know, get there. And I'll just share 2 useful images at the end. Okay, so what should our children eat? As I said, we're not focusing that much on what our children eat so much this evening as how we feed them. But that is a question. At the end of the day, it's about eating and what do we feed our children? So in 3 words, I think the answer to this question is what we eat, okay? So if we as parents or caregivers eat a fairly balanced diet, varied, you know, some whole grains, fruit, veg, proteins, then that's what we need to get our kids on board with. And that avoids scenarios that I often see again in my practice. For example, where parents feel they have to make 2 separate dinners because the parents or whoever will eat one dinner and then others won't eat that and they have to make a separate dinner. So that's twice the work. And, you know, that's something to be avoided if possible. And, you know, a different solution really needs to come into play. Okay, so when should our children eat? Something kind of related. Again, keeping it really simple. 3 words, when they're hungry. Now, that kind of ties in with the idea of intuitive eating for children. So it's not just for adults. So what, you know, you might hear a lot about intuitive eating these days. So what exactly does it mean? So it's basically, in theory anyways, it's eating when we're hungry. And it's stopping when we're satisfied or when we're no longer hungry. So again, the theory is very easy. But the challenge is implementing this in practice, not just for our children, but for all of us. And if more of us mindfully ate or intuitively ate or ate just when we were hungry, the world, I think, would have a lot less problems. So it's how do we, you know, achieve this? Okay, just very briefly, things I see in my practice, effects of poor diets. I suppose sometimes it can be easy to kind of think, oh, it doesn't matter that much maybe what we eat. But I would see a lot more constipation, for example, in children that have limited diets. So they may be eating no fruit or veg, or very little fruit or veg, maybe lots of carbs, maybe lots of white carbs, you know, the white pasta, white breads, not taking enough liquid like water. So they definitely are more constipated than kids who would have more balanced diet. Of course, our diets can affect our kids' immunity. Some children will pick up anything that's going, coughs, colds, infections, and they may also take longer to recover, or they may need more kind of intervention like antibiotics to recover. Of course, diets can affect growth. Parents will come to me with concerns about children who are underweight or who have difficulty putting on weight or who are very kind of small for their age or compared to their peers. And also, parents will come to me about concerns that their children maybe are overweight or that if they continue eating as they are, that they may become overweight. And even like the effect of a poor diet, we'll call it, short term, this idea of blood sugar roller coaster, probably lots of you have heard about it. So this is just a little diagram. So in the bottom blue line is when we eat. So let's say most of our children eat breakfast or half of them or whatever, and the morning snack, the lunch, kind of the norm, let's say, for many children. And then on the left is the sugar in our blood. So obviously when we eat, the sugar in our blood increases and then that reduces over time. And the problem is if it gets too low. So these kind of red areas or the red lines shows that our blood sugar has become too low, and that has definite, I think, significant effects that are very apparent on possibly our children's mood and their energy and their attention. So we don't want, to get into the red. We want to stay more in the blue area. So we want more balanced blood sugar levels. And that's kind of more, we'll say, short-term effects of poor diets. But there are long-term effects as well. And it can be difficult to see these, I suppose, because we're just, something down the road. It's hard to know, well, what's going to happen. So this is a really interesting study. I think it's fascinating. It was done recently, and it just looked at one thing, which was high sugar diets in early life. So it tracked children and it looked at their consumption of sugar. There were some who had high sugar, and it was able to look at these same children and the outcomes even 50 years later. So as I said, this is, I think, a fascinating study. So it looked at, in the UK, during the war times, there was rations. So there was a lot less sugar available. And then after the war, the rations ended. So there was a lot more sugar available and a lot more consumed. So they found, I'll just go on to the next screen. I blew it up a little bit. So this kind of reddish line, purpley, reddy, pink line is the sugar level. So it was lowish, and then it doubled, and with the rationing when it ended, and then it stayed high. So just go back again for a second. So what effect does high sugar intake have for children in early life, long term? So it found that high sugar intake in early life significantly increased the prevalence or the amount of, for example, diabetes by 50%. So that simply means for the children who participated in the study and had a high sugar intake early in life, they had twice the likelihood of developing diabetes years later. So, the saying, you are what you eat, I really do believe that, there is effects of what we're eating, whether it's short term or long term. Okay, so let's go on to some of the things I see. So I suppose a lot of the parents that would come to me in my practice, their children's diet has got worse over time. So they may have started off really good as a baby or toddler. They ate a big variety. They ate kind of what was served. But over time, that has changed. So why is this the case? People will often ask me. So I suppose one of the reasons simply is if our child, or any of us even, are eating a very limited diet, we have to eat these same foods very often. And the problem is we can get very tired of them. And we can get so tired of them, even if they're, our favorite thing, like sausages or whatever, to eat. And we become so tired with them that we don't want to eat them anymore. And then the problem is for these children, if they aren't open to other foods, if they've given up these favorite foods or the foods they eat so often, and they're not open to other foods, then their diet becomes more and more limited over time. Okay, so another, I suppose, scenario I see very often, or parents tell me about a lot, is frequent snacking. So that's the idea, I suppose, of eating very frequently. So what are the problems with this? Some people might say, kids need to eat very often. And then I'll propose some quick solutions. So I suppose the problem with frequent snacking is that we often serve what I call snack foods. So snack foods are, often, high, or they're quite sugary maybe, or sweetened, like yogurt or fruit. They might be finger foods, or, crunchy textures like crackers. So these are very appealing to kids. And that's, if our kids are eating very often, they're more likely to be eating these type of foods. We don't often serve a portion or a little bit or whatever of dinner or of a meal at a snack time. We offer these kind of snack foods so they can dominate the diet. And of course, if any of us, our children or any of us, are eating very frequently, we may not be hungry for meals. So really, ideally, we do what we want with our kids eating is that, you know, they are hungry for meal times, and then they will eat a substantial amount, and then they're satisfied. They're not looking for snacks again quickly after, and they, you know, you can do something else. You can close the kitchen. Okay, so what kind of solutions would I propose for very frequent snackers? So I suppose one thing is to think of a snack more as a mini meal. So instead of, you know, serving the fruit and the yogurt and those kind of snack foods, we would serve something that's more kind of like a meal. So for example, soup with bread, or, you know, your raw veg, let's say, with, you know, a dip or whatever. So you're kind of moving away from total snack foods. Another really simple idea that might work and that might be feasible in some houses is changing the time of the meal. So some kids may not eat a lot of breakfast, or they may not eat a lot at school, and they come home and they're starving. So that might be the time actually to offer them the main meal, or kind of the dinner of the day. Now, as I said, it's not feasible in every house, but they're most hungry, so they might be more likely to eat it. And then if they eat a substantial amount, they're less likely to want to snack then for the afternoon, because often after school there's less structure in some houses. You know, that's when the snacking happens. And then if there's a lot of snacking, they're not hungry for dinner, let's say, or the main meal in the evening, and then they haven't eaten much dinner, and then they're looking for snacks again after dinner. So it can become a little bit of a vicious cycle. So we have to kind of intervene and change it a little bit, rather than this kind of grazing all the time. Another solution might be to offer a more substantial snack. So if it's not feasible to offer the dinner, let's say, or main meal after school when they come home, you might want to offer, let's say, instead of just fruit and yogurt, you might want to offer, you know, some protein, something that will be more substantial. So again, they're not looking for snacks shortly after, or they're not spending the afternoon snacking. So when parents ask me, you know, how often should my children snack? I suppose, again, I like to say very simply, well, are they hungry for meal times? I really think we should prioritize the three main meals of the day. So the breakfast, a midday lunch, or whatever you call it in your house, and an evening meal or dinner. And if our children aren't hungry for these meals, we might need to look at reducing the snack, you know, moving it further away from the meal, or, you know, changing things around so that they are more hungry for meal times. The priority is the three main meals, and then snacks can happen in between that, you know, to bridge the gap. Okay, so again, a lot of parents that would contact me would have, I suppose, a lot of stress around eating. And meal times, especially, I suppose, that main meal in the evening. So, you know, a great question that I often get asked is, how do we create more positive meal times? How do we move away from all this stress? So I suppose one thing is to focus less on the food. Obviously, meal times are about fueling our children, but it's not just about fueling our children. It's also about what else happens at meal times. So like Emmet was saying, for children who spend more time preparing food with their parents, they have other positive outcomes in their life. So, you know, it's about connecting with our children, you know, maybe having a lighter atmosphere. You know, can people tell jokes? Can you tell, you know, something good that happened for the day, something, you know, not so good? So that's maybe important, to move the focus more maybe away from exactly what's it or what's not it, to kind of a broader issue. It's a meal time. We sit down and we chat and we connect, and, you know, that's what meal times should be about. A simple idea that works very well for some children is to offer more control to them around eating. And a simple way of doing this is to offer choices. So let's say I said to my kids, you know, what do you want to eat for dinner? And they might say chocolate. And I'd be like, okay, but that's not on the menu for the dinner, you know. So sometimes giving an open-ended question like that, what do you want for dinner? You know, they can come up with any answer, or they may be overwhelmed. So it's better, I think, if we kind of structure, kind of provide a structure and say, you know, well, do you want maybe two or three, you know, pick 2 or 3 out of these options. So the choices would generally be similar. There might be 2 breakfast cereals, If I said again to my children, or any children, I think, would you prefer, or would you like to have broccoli now or chocolate? I think, the broccoli is never going to win. So if they're kind of similar, like to breakfast cereals, then, it's more of a choice rather than something that's seen as very nice and something that's maybe seen as less nice. And of course, pressure is a big thing sometimes with children feel pressure around eating or eating a certain amount. Now, not that any parent intends to apply pressure, and we don't mean to, but sometimes it kind of can happen. So it's important not to, for our children not to feel pressure. So how do we kind of avoid pressure like this around eating? So you could say something very simple like this: you don't have to eat if you're not hungry. I mean it. So some parents will say, well, if I say that, sure, I won't get my kids to eat anything. Or, but I would use a phrase like this only in certain circumstances. So if we offer a reasonable food, okay? So reasonable food is something that your child generally eats, okay? So let's take an example. Let's say it was dinner time and I offered my children a bowl of peas. And I said, that's the dinner now, lads. If you want to eat it, or if you're hungry, eat it. But if you're not, if you're not hungry, you don't have to eat it. But they may not be even comfortable touching peas. So really, is peas a reasonable offer? It's not. So we should offer a reasonable food that they think is reasonable. Like I might think peas, what's the big deal? They're just peas, But my kids may not think peas are reasonable. So offering a food that they think is reasonable means, well, if they're hungry, then they should eat. But there's never pressure to eat. If they're not hungry, we really shouldn't be making our kids eat because they're not hungry. Another thing, I suppose, that's important if we're saying something like this is to not offer an alternative. So if I'm offering a reasonable food, for example, plain pasta or pesto pasta, then I can expect my kids to eat it. And I don't have to, offer something different. So for example, I'm not sure if they really like this lasagna, let's say is the family dinner, and they don't eat much of it. And then I go, okay, they're hungry, and now I have to offer another food. And it's usually a more preferable food. So it might be toast. So some children will hold out if what they're offered first isn't, to their liking, let's say, and then they can fill up on the more preferred food like toast. So there's no incentive to eat the dinner. So again, we want to move away from this cycle because this can become kind of a repeated cycle and the kids know, okay, I don't need to eat this first option because there'll be something good coming or better in a little while. And again, the no snack shortly after. If we're offering a reasonable food like the pesto, pasta, let's say, then we shouldn't need to offer a snack after because if they're hungry, they, should be able to eat that option. Okay. Another question I get asked a lot is how to expand our children's diet. So for parents who have limited eaters, this really is, an important question that I get asked a lot. So one way of expanding a child's diet is food chaining. So food chaining is using a food that your child is already eating and identifying new foods that are similar. So that could be similar in color, in shape, in texture, in smell or taste, and serving them at meal times. So let's take an example. So I often hear that McDonald's chips are the child's favorite types of chips. So obviously McDonald's chips are a certain type of chips. I call them a thin chip. So if you were doing this food chaining, you might think, okay, so can I go somewhere else other than McDonald's that has slightly different chips? They're still chips. So we'll say fatter chips like in Supermax, but they are a little bit different. So this is the idea that you're introducing a food that's more similar than not, but it is a little bit different and see will your child accept that. Now, for some children, they're not at all in a place where they can accept a slightly different food. Some children I help will not, accept a different flavor, let's say of yogurt or a different brand of, for example, crackers. So offering them that food is not, not a suitable strategy. You need to work back and step back before that. But for some children, food chaining may be the way to expand their diet. So eating with distractions. Just wanted to say a little bit about this because some parents will tell me that they feel, they can't get their children to eat, we'll say the dinner, or to eat certain foods if they aren't distracted, usually with a screen. So the goal in theory again is that there is no screens with eating. Okay, I have no problem with screens before and after or whatever, but during eating, I think, children can get too distracted by a screen. So I would be recommending that you replace that with some other distraction that's a little bit less distracting. So it might be, an audio story that's been read or music. So there is something else there, but it's not quite as distracting as we'll say an iPad. You can go cold turkey and say, okay, that's it. No more screens at eating, which is difficult to do, or you could gradually reduce it. So a much easier approach. So if your child, for example, spends 10 minutes eating, let's say, with a screen, you could move to 9 minutes and try and have 1 minute to start with that's screen free and then build that up over time. I suppose there are exceptions to this general rule or the general goal I would have of eating with no distractions. And that is for children who are very, very anxious around eating. So some of these children will have maybe high anxiety in other areas as well. And to get them, to eat, it's a very anxious time for them. So a screen may be needed. Or the other exception is for children who don't seem to feel hunger. So there are children who will go for hours without eating. So it's like it doesn't register, or if they are hungry, you'd have to look at root causes, why are they not hungry? But some kids don't seem to register the hunger. So it is important to still offer food regularly, even if our children, aren't registering their hunger. And a screen may be needed there. Okay, let's have a very quick focus on breakfast. So this is a quick tip that may work in some people's houses. So for some kids and children, breakfast is the best meal of the day because they have been fasting overnight, they wake up, they're most hungry, and I suppose what we offer for breakfast, like in Ireland, we're one of the biggest consumers of breakfast cereals in Europe. So, it's a very nice, the cereal or whatever, it's a very nice option. But for other children, they really struggle with eating anything. So, they may be too tired. So could you, see about getting a few minutes more sleep, even 15 minutes more sleep a night. They may be very rushed, maybe 5 minutes earlier, to allow for more time for breakfast might be, work very well in your house. But another simple tip might be, so we think, when you're sleeping, your body's resting, but your kidneys actually are still working. So often, for some of us, we may wake up and we may be slightly dehydrated. So offering a small drink first may help stimulate the appetite. So it's worth trying if your child isn't that interested in breakfast. Breakfast is really essential, I feel, for growing bodies. They've already been fasting overnight from whatever time they finished eating the night before. So you don't want to prolong that fast any longer. And, you want them fueled going into school for their mind and body. So you need to, I suppose, if breakfast time is a struggle in your house, how can you make it as easy as possible for your children? Is the food quick to eat? Is it portable? You might be wanting to get a bus or whatever, the car after this, and prepping ahead. Sorry, it's hard to see that in my screen. So, there's lots of things we can do once we prepare ahead. So I'm the type of person, I always like to have as much as I can done the night before, in case we sleep in, or just so I know when I'm going to bed, okay, the lunch is made, or, whatever, the school bag is ready, just in case, as I said, things go pear-shaped in the morning. So, you can do things like, we say, French toast. That could be made ahead, and you could pop it in the microwave in the morning. Or you could make like small pancakes, cook them, and you can pop them in a toaster on the morning and heat them up. So I said, if our children are having difficulties eating a breakfast, well, can we support them in some way that makes it easier that they do get some fuel before they leave the house or before they start school? Very quick focus next on packed lunches. Again, we know there's particular challenges with packed lunches. Some kids, for example, only want to eat an apple that has no peel on it. They don't want that in the school lunchbox, or they've very little time and they can be distracted by others. So again, how can we make it easy and quick to eat? I would recommend that there's no surprises in lunchboxes. So, if you put in a lolly or chocolate or something, that kind of surprise is okay. But I'm talking about surprises like you might be saying, I'm not sure if they like this fruit that much, but I'll put it in and see. So I wouldn't put it in the lunchbox. I would offer that at a time away from, the lunchbox where, you can kind of see how they react. Because some things go into the lunchbox and they spend the day at school and they come home the same as, as they went in. So I think no surprises, fruits, that kind of thing, or veg, or anything really, protein or carbs, is a better approach. Of course, research would show that when children are more involved with food, that, they're more likely to, eat the food. So you might even ask them, if we'll say you're making the lunch, would you prefer, we'll say, a choice? You can have a cheese sandwich or you can have a chicken sandwich. What would you like tomorrow or later? So that they feel they're involved. So again, the choices, maybe 2 or 3 choices that are similar, that they usually like, you can offer. Of course, they can make lunches themselves. And if that seems like a big task every night, you could even get them to make the lunch once a week. So getting them involved, I think, there's more likelihood that they eat. And I would recommend not having a load of different items in the lunchbox. I think it's better to have maybe 3 or 4 components, so you're not overwhelming the child and they can be taking little bits. 3 or 4 kind of core components, and that's the lunch. Okay, so I'm conscious of the time. So this slide just talks a little bit about what a positive relationship with food looks like. So obviously we want our kids to grow up healthy and happy, but there's more focus now, I suppose, on having a positive relationship with food, because unfortunately many of us adults don't have a positive relationship with food. So there's repeated dieting, affects things like your body image, your confidence, all these things. Food should not be negative. End of story. And if people don't really enjoy food, we'll say, and I love my food, I really look forward to eating and cooking and all this, and that's, everyone doesn't have to be the same, but it should be at least neutral, but it should not be negative. We don't want to create this kind of negative relationship with food or foster it. So what are we looking at in terms of what a positive relationship with food looks like? So again, it's about children listening to their bodies. So this idea of intuitive eating. So, that we know our children know when they're hungry and they eat, and they know when they're getting more full or satisfied, they can stop eating. So you can even tell your, children about this depending on their age. But I think a good way of explaining it is this. So if we start eating and we're not really that hungry, well, then how do we know when to stop? So usually the theory is ideally we start eating when we're hungry, and then, our body is registering, and our brain and all that, our stomach's getting more full, we're more satisfied, so we're not hungry anymore and we're not as motivated to keep eating. But if we start when we're not hungry, then are we still kind of processing some of the food that we've had already, or if we're full and we're trying to eat more, it's kind of going against our body. So we should kind of process the food we have, and then, so leave a certain amount of time between eating, and then, develop an appetite to eat again. So of course, the key, I suppose, of a positive relationship with food is about eating and enjoying a variety of growing foods. So I talk about growing foods for growing bodies. So most of our children want to grow bigger, stronger, faster, become an adult. A lot of them can't wait to become an adult and, to become more mature and, get more, whatever, freedom and all this. So it's important that our children, are fueled with growing foods. So the growing foods basically give us superpowers or fuel or power, whatever you'd like to say, to fuel this growing body. So the idea is that our children generally eat growing foods. Now, of course, there are other foods as well we eat, like sweets. I'm not against that. There needs to be a balance. So mostly growing foods, and then sometimes, we're eating other foods like the sweets and the lollies. It's about a balance, really. We don't want to restrict our children, because all the research will say that's not a good idea, and I've seen the effects of that. So it's about, a little bit of what you like, and it's loads of these growing foods so that we can fuel our growing body. So when I talked there about a balance, what does that mean? So I think this is a really nice little visual. You probably have heard loads before about, a food pyramid and certain amount of portions of food every day. It can get, a little bit hard to keep track of. So this is just the idea of, they call it a kid's healthy eating plate. It came from Harvard University, but I like to call it a balanced plate. So per meal, we can look at, do we have a number of components? Do we have a healthy protein? Do we have some whole grains ideally? And do we have some fruit or veg? So it's kind of, let's say, the idea of the traditional Irish dinner. You'd have meat or fish or chicken, whatever. So you'd have your protein, your potatoes, and you'd have some veg. So the idea is that, a balanced plate or a healthy meal isn't just a bowl of pasta. It's not just one food. We need a variety of foods to kind of, fuel this growing body. And water should be the main drink, rather than sweetened drinks, like even diluted juice, or even, those concentrated squashes like my wedding, because the more we offer the sweetened drinks, the less, our children want water, or they're willing to accept it, because it's seen then as too boring, it's too bland, it's too, it's not sweet if they get used of having a sweet drink regularly. So why is it important to have a balanced plate? Again, it comes back to this blood sugar roller coaster. So this is like the slide I had before. So if we keep within the blue area of the sugar in our blood, it gives better mood, better attention, better energy, rather than going into the red area where our blood sugar levels are so low, and that affects energy, it affects mood, attention, so we all are familiar, for probably ourselves and definitely in our children, this idea of, hangry. We have, they've got so hungry, or the blood sugar levels have gone so low that they get angry, or whatever negative word you'd like to use. So ideally, we keep within, as I said, the blue zone, because otherwise, I suppose, we're stressing our body. If, it's not getting fuel regularly enough, our body's kind of stressed out, and we don't want to be in that situation, and we don't want our children to be in that situation too often. And this is, again, another nice visual. So the last one there on the kids' healthy eating plate is something you could print out and put it up in your kitchen, just to remind us, we need a number of elements, and what is kind of a balanced plate. And this is also a nice visual. Eat the Rainbow, again from Harvard. So it just focuses on fruit and veg, but it gives the idea that we need a variety. And again, why do we need the variety? It's because if we eat only a few foods, we can get very tired of them. And so can our kids, and stop eating them. And also, eating a variety means that our children they're more likely to get all the nutrients they need. So I think recent research would say there's 38 essential nutrients needed, for bodies, and probably more so for growing bodies. So this visual is kind of, a printout you could, as I said, put in your kitchen, and it just reminds us that sometimes we focus maybe a lot on one or two colors, and we kind of neglect other ones. So, can we introduce more colour or more variety within that colour. Really, variety is the spice of life. So I'll just go through some general questions I get very quickly, and then we'll have our Q&A. So is hunger a solution to better eating? Yes and no. So basically, we don't want our children to be hungry, like I mentioned, where they've kind of gone too hungry, but some children never feel hungry. You know, they may be frequently snacking, so they're never hungry for meal times. So the aim is that our children do develop a little hunger, and, you know, they're ready then to eat a meal. Hiding veggies, yes or no? So we all, I suppose, would hide veggies at times. You know, if you're making a tomato sauce or spaghetti bolognese, you cook up the onions and you may blend them through the tomato sauce before you serve it. But I suppose the problem with hiding veg is if we do it very often. Now, some parents will say, you know, I can't get my kids to eat veg or whatever food if it's not totally camouflaged. But those children will never see what that veg or fruit, you know, can also apply to that, what it looks like. You know, what does it taste like? What does it feel like, the texture of it? So really, we need to get our children on board with what different veg and fruit in some cases are like. Because usually, you know, as an adult, we don't have all our veg hidden. You know, we see our veg, you know, as part of the stew or part of the stir fry or, you know, on the side. So our aim should be to get our children on board with the veg and fruit in our house so they get familiar with them. Concerns about weight is something that parents would talk to me about or approach me about. Either they're afraid their children are underweight or that they have difficulty putting on weight or that they're overweight or, you know, will maybe go that way if, you know, in time, if their habit or if their eating continues. So I would not recommend focusing exclusively on weight. It's a very narrow thing, I think. We'll say, you know, if you just focus on the number on scales. Instead, I would take a broader approach, more holistic approach, and I would help parents and help children to have more healthy eating habits. So having the regular meal times, eating breakfast, eating a balanced plate, not frequently snacking, you know, these kind of habits then should help, I suppose, correct weight, because, you know, children are growing, so they have an opportunity to change more than us as adults. So focusing on healthy eating habits is also more positive than focusing on weight and kind of saying, you know, certain foods are bad or they're high in fat or, you know, you can't have them as much or whatever. So it's a more positive approach and it's more holistic. And lastly, rewards. Should we reward children for eating food? So the idea, you know, or an example here would be, you know, if, you know, we want to get our kids to eat veg or eat a certain amount of dinner or whatever, that we might say to them, you can have a biscuit if you finish your dinner or eat your veg or whatever. So I suppose the problem with that is that the children can get very focused on the end point. The biscuit or whatever we're offering is already attractive enough. We don't have to sell it anymore. And then also, I suppose, you're comparing one food against another, and the veg or whatever you're offering first is looking worse compared to the biscuit. And the research would show that, yes, children may eat food like that, you know, like the biscuit, or sorry, the veg to get the biscuit, but long term, it doesn't help their perception of that food, like the broccoli. So they might eat it and go, oh, this is so gross, but I get the biscuit now. So really rewarding foods, rewarding children, with foods, and especially, you know, like biscuits and stuff, isn't really the best idea in practice. So these are some emails that have come in already. Emmet have sent me challenges with children's eating. Parents are telling me that children have been sick, they've dropped foods, they've never returned them. They no longer eat foods they did eat when they were younger. They have very limited meals, especially dinners. They don't eat veg unless camouflaged, or some children, lots of children I see would eat no veg. Some children I see don't eat any protein or very little, or they won't eat fruit. Or that professionals dismiss this limited diet. So a classic example, without highlighting any certain profession, is, you know, parents would talk to professionals about their concerns about their child's limited diet. And often the response they get is the child is growing and aren't they fine? And they have energy, or, look at them, they seem fine. But yet their diet is very limited. And generally, no one would dispute, if you looked at what they're eating, like just carbs or no fruit, no veg, no protein, whatever the case is, or very little of those food groups. It is very unbalanced. No one is arguing that that is an ideal diet or even a great diet. But people will kind of dismiss it and say, oh, sure, don't worry, it'll get better by itself. It's just a phase. But sometimes for, I suppose, a significant number of children I help, that isn't the case. And as I said already, diets can get worse over time. So that's just me from Go and Healthy Eaters. So, Emmet, have we some questions?
We do. Thanks for that, Colette. Well done. Very informative. We covered a lot of ground, I think. And I think hopefully almost all the parents that are here found it helpful. I expect most of them did in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, that was the plan. As I said at the outset, we try and cover a bit of ground in the Q&A. Some stuff has come in chat, which we'll get to, and some stuff came in already, which we'll try and cover as well, right? I don't want to try and cover too much that's already been done, but I think there's a couple of things we could probably usefully cover again. But here's one, and I expect a lot of parents wonder about. So a very active child, can you offer advice on nutrition for primary school children involved in sports like swimming, for example? So kids who are very, very active, nutrition for those kids. Anything in that line? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
So again, they may need more frequent snacking because they have such an active life. The other thing, I suppose, is to focus not just on quantity, but on quality. So, the balanced plate, for example, are they getting some protein at every meal? Are they getting more substantial fuel than just carbohydrate, like the bowl of pasta? So you'd focus on quality of food, kind of more nutrient dense food, rather than just, as I said, a bowl of pasta.
Okay, there's a similar question in a way, right? But my 13-year-old son, right, growing very fast, and constantly hungry, even after a nutritious meal, the result of frequently snacks, biscuits. Otherwise, he would have apart from that, has a healthy diet. To suggest any kind of nutritious filling snacks, so I try and get him off the biscuits, I suppose. Any other thoughts on that?
And the other thing maybe is he eating enough at the mealtime? I see my kids, they have big appetites for the size of them. So, some of those kids can actually eat, a very big portion. So I'm just saying this might be one scenario that, a certain amount of dinner is offered. So I would say to them before they leave the table, are you sure you have enough to eat now? Are you full? Are you satisfied? Or whatever way you want to phrase it, so that they aren't thinking, okay, I eat a bit of dinner and then, I can eat loads of snacks. And possibly most kids like biscuits, but it could be because they're hungry, so they need to eat maybe a bigger quantity, as well as looking at, the quality of the food they're offered. Are they getting the protein, for example? Is it more of a balanced meal? So if you're looking at snacks, more nutritious, very energy dense snacks would have some protein in them, so like your nuts and seeds, things like energy balls, your hummus, there's lots of different, I suppose, nutritious snacks out there, depending on what the particular child likes. So the quantity might be needed looking at, as well as the kind of quality of what's been offered.
Okay, what about this one? My son won't eat dairy at all. Is there something as a substitute for that? No dairy. What else can you put into the diet?
Okay, so I suppose in some cultures, kids, once they're weaned, don't have any dairy. In Ireland, we seem to, and in some cultures, get a little bit freaked out if children can't eat dairy or won't eat dairy. So it isn't essential. Obviously, there is calcium in dairy, and that's good for our growing bones and teeth. But there are lots of other foods that contain both calcium and also other nutrients that are needed for teeth and bones, for example, magnesium. So what I would say is, a variety of other foods. There's, like ground almonds. There's lots of other non-dairy sources of foods. So generally, if our kids, for example, are eating some nuts and seeds every day, they probably are getting the calcium they need, and they may not need any, or they may not have any dairy, and that's fine. So there's lots of other ways of getting non-dairy foods into kids, and that doesn't mean they're not getting all the requirements they need.
Okay, and tell me this, not sure we fully covered now, but my child is overweight and has a big appetite. I think it's a younger child. My child is overweight and has a big appetite. How can I help her?
Okay, so again, you need to look at things like, what is been served. Is there a balance? I seem to have the same answer for all these questions, but it is really important, to have a balanced plate. Again, not just the bowl of pasta. So again, I think tuning into, what our children are feeling. So sometimes we eat because, it's a habit, or, we're bored or we're sad or whatever. There's always lots of reasons to eat other than hunger. So it is a good idea, even for very young kids, to start this idea of, listening to your tummy. What does it say? And if our children, for example, overeat, let's say, they go to a party and they get sick, well then, making that connection, well, maybe, if we ate a little bit less, we wouldn't feel as bad. So it's really important, and you can do it from a very young age, even preschool, starting kids to think about, what is my body telling me? Because your body will, tell you if you want to listen, but often we ignore it, So we eat, as I said, lots of times when we're not hungry. So there's, as I said, lots of reasons kids may be eating, but then are they actually always physically hungry? Sometimes we can be a little dehydrated, and we might think we're hungry. So again, offering a drink first. So, more than just a balanced plate, I think tuning into what our body is saying and what our children's body is saying is really important. So let's say it's dinner time. I think, okay, our kids should eat, but if they're not hungry, let's say they had a substantial snack earlier, we shouldn't, make our kids eat. So there's a lot of kind of expectations around eating, and I should eat, and other people are eating, or the food is available, and it may not be necessarily driven by hunger. And really, eating should only be driven by hunger. So it depends what's going on, but that's just some ideas.
Thanks for that, Colette. It seems to me now that everywhere I look in supermarket, there's protein, everything's protein. But there's a question here come in. Would you recommend high protein milks to increase protein intake?
So what I kind of say, and this is, I suppose you'd see it more in secondary schools, is there is a lot of a kind of focus on a high protein diet. So generally, most of us aren't low in protein. Obviously, the kids who don't eat any protein is a different story. We're getting protein from a variety of sources, and really what we should be prioritizing, I think, generally is kind of real food. So protein is naturally in our meat or whatever, rather than having to go to other sources of kind of, added in protein. And there's already a bit of protein in milk now. That's not very substantial, but it's sometimes, like the protein powders and stuff, they're not the best quality protein. Yes, it's protein, but as I said, if you have a balanced diet and you're getting protein, we'll say the 3 main meals, you shouldn't really be looking for other sources of protein. And some people can eat too much protein, and it puts stress, it's too much for their body, and it's stressing out their body. So there is a lot of focus on protein, sometimes in terms of weight loss, because, protein is more satisfying. And if we eat, protein with our meal, we won't be as hungry again. But I think it can go a bit extreme, and there's like protein, and, that's too much. So the focus on kind of the everyday, regular foods, real foods, rather than kind of looking for these particular products that are high in protein, and the protein added sometimes isn't always the best quality in terms of things like, it's a type of isolated pea protein or something. I mean, you don't get that naturally. Some factory makes that. So we want to be really prioritizing real food most of the time if we can, because that is the most easily absorbed. We know, our body can use it. But if you're, taking these other kind of things, you're like, is that really, am I absorbing that? Or, it gets trickier.
Colette, there was a little like this, right? Around smells. I don't know what I would call it, phobia, but it'd just be like a child who doesn't enjoy eating in school. She likes the food, right? She likes to pack her lunchbox, but dislikes the smells of other food. Children's food, doesn't enjoy eating her lunch. I think there's another one from another parent saying, the child would be saying similar things at the dinner table, that the smells are putting them off, that kind of thing.
So some children are very sensitive to smells. Others, are very sensitive to textures. In particular, a lot of kids would, want crunchy textures. For example, they don't want mixed textures. Like fruit, we say in yogurt. Pieces. So some smells are obviously stronger than others, and they may, be sensitive to some particular types of smells, even cooked fish or whatever. So I suppose what generally I recommend in any of those cases is that we start with where the child is currently, and we challenge them a little bit outside their comfort zone. So, we would expose them to mild smells, and build on that. And it's about being very positive, no pressure, and doing it in a very gradual way. So sometimes, like the textures, our children need to get, used of something different than what they usually have. And they need to be challenged a little bit, because otherwise they'll always, I only eat smooth purees, or I only, don't eat fish or whatever. So that's kind of a process in itself, but it needs to be positive. It needs to be step by step, meeting them where they're at and just slowly moving them to the next step. And there might be 10 steps before, they'll get to, a significant difference. You can't rush those things, you can't kind of assume, oh, that's silly, it's just whatever smell. If our children are very sensitive to it, well, then that's the way they are. And we have to, help them and support them with that, rather than kind of dismiss it or, kind of pressurize them to, just accept as something they find very difficult to accept.
Okay, the strange one here, but I think we should ask it, right, is I have a problem with a 10-year-old daughter. She's afraid to eat after choking incident. Very worried about her. She's already very thin, can't afford to lose weight. Any advice? Much appreciated.
Okay.
Ever come across anything like that?
Yeah, so sometimes particular things happen. So like choking, or, kids eating and they got sick or whatever, and they have obviously memory of that, and they have associations with that. So let's say she was eating chicken and there was a choking incident, then, after that, all meat or whatever would be off the menu, let's say. So, we need to kind of, I suppose, I would have a cognitive behavioral approach. So, we need to look at the thinking behind that, and, why did that happen? Was it a once off and we didn't do this maybe, or this happened and we won't have that happen again, as well as the kind of behavioral approach, so that that association gets changed, and she's supported in a way that she sees, okay, there isn't a likelihood of choking, isn't as strong as I thought before. This is a safe food. It's, nothing bad will happen to me, or, this isn't the likely outcome again. So I would encourage that parent to get in contact with me at Growing Healthy Eaters, and let's get to the root cause of it and support her, because, that's difficult, isn't it? And it's putting her off probably other foods. And she's afraid. Is she afraid of eating, or afraid of eating certain foods? So that's limiting her. And it's very negative, that memory and that association.
Colette, thank you. Right. We're coming to very much to the end of our time, right? So what I'm going to do, just before we finish up, one last very quick thing, right? Stick that up there and say, right, if you guys, two things really. One, I hope you found that useful, and why won't that work? That's why. Okay. So if you need to get any more information, or you're curious about the Planet Youth stuff, you can look at the website, the parenting information, the booklets, all of those are there as downloads. Like I say, you get that information through your schools in the West. So planetyouth.ie, or you can get in touch with me at info@planetyouth.ie. Colette, you were saying, and we do have some, tricky situations, difficult. I know this, it's not a platform for you to, to promote it like a private practice, but at the same time, you do see people, and you're willing to talk to people on a free consultation basis and so on and so forth. So if there's a particular concern, or if there's stuff that you wanted to follow up with Colette, by all means. So you might just say the name of the organization, the business, if you like, Colette. It wouldn't hurt to let the parents know.
Thank you. So growinghealthyeaters.ie is my website, and once you go in there, you'll find links and contact. So don't feel you can't contact me. Absolutely do, rather than have these concerns and think there's no one to help you, or that's just the way your child is. I would say, yes, we're all a certain way, but that doesn't mean we can't support our children if they're challenged in a particular area. And eating might be their area of challenge, the same as it is for sleeping for other kids or whatever, reading for other kids. You know, there is support out there.
And very much like, I mean, as you say, we're very much here to talk about the Planet Youth stuff and the idea of preventive, and the better routines and habits and platform or foundation we can get for our young people at an early age, it pays off in spades. It's so evident in the data, it's unbelievable. So planetyouth.ie, growing healthy eaters, if you want to follow Colette. Colette, you have the power, you're the main host link, so if you want to just hit the hang up button on your top left there, the red one, and that'll finish us. I'll send out a recording by email to people next week. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Emmet. It's been a pleasure, and thanks everyone for listening. It was great to get to talk to so many of you, and I hope you found it useful.